Thanks a lot. And I must admit, the only reason that I'm giving this talk in English is actually so I could choose this title. So for those of you who didn't get the reference, this is supposed to allude to the famous novel by Philip K. Dick, so Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And for those of you who don't read books anymore, you still might know it because the plot of the movie Blade Runner is based on it. And for those of you who don't know Blade Runner, that's not a big deal because you actually don't have to know anything of that to follow along my talk. So let's find out whether androids have nightmares, and if so, what type of nightmares. Now, as we all know, I guess, is that nightmares can be quite different, so ranging from the monsters hiding in the closet to suddenly being stripped naked in the classroom to your mother-in-law coming to visit or something like that. So, and the same applies to Android malware. So you have kind of the nightmare that tries to strip you naked financially. You have the type of malware that more hides in the closet, tries to spy on you. And what I'm trying to do in this talk is to give you a big overview of what techniques malware uses, which forms it can take. We will look at two examples, Hydra and Octo, to get a better understanding, but it's meant as a more higher level talk to give you a basic idea on what's going on, to make you aware of when something suspicious happens so you know what to do. We won't do a too technical deep dive, but whenever you have questions afterwards and want to discuss it in a bit more detail, you can find me here on your way to the cafeteria on the left side, so always feel free to come and have a chat. Now, let's start and look at some forms and shapes of Android malware. First, who of you was the proud owner of one of these devices back in the early 2000s? Not too many, so I guess either you were too young or you just weren't one of the cool kids, so not sure. But this also means that you kind of missed being witness to a very important milestone, which is getting this message. And this is actually the example of the very first malware specifically targeting smartphones. So back then, it was not yet Android, but I mean, out of historical purposes, I wanted to include it. But it targeted Nokia devices, which had the Symbian OS back then. And compared to actual nightmares, it was back then more like a bad dream. Because the only thing it did was showing you this message and draining your battery in the background a bit because it spread via Bluetooth and was constantly scanning for other devices which had Bluetooth enabled in the surroundings. So it was also very easy to get infected because the only mistake you had to make is being in an elevator with someone who had an infected phone and not having turned off your Bluetooth. Now, till then, a lot has changed. Smartphones have evolved quite a lot. And so, of course, has malware. And there's now a lot more stuff and capabilities on phones that malware is, of course, interested in. So being from data you have, files, photos, but also the possibility to spy on you via microphone, camera, get your location, things like that. So the idea, or when we talk about malware and what it is, we usually think it's something that just steals data, which is, of course, true. But malware can be much more, and especially mobile malware can do a lot of other different stuff that isn't including stealing your data, but still causes harm to you. So, for example, any idea what those 8 apps might have in common? So some language, game, other mobile games, some lifestyle stuff, a keyboard. Doesn't really look as if they have much in common, but those are actually examples of 8 apps which were part of about 470 apps that were part of a huge scamware campaign, which was discovered in early this year in 2022, January 2022. And by then, all those apps had in sum a download of over 100 million. So just to give you an idea, which doesn't mean that over 100 million people actually got, became victim, because there is another step to it, but just based on the downloads. So what did those apps do? Once you launched them, they asked you to enter your phone number and to be able to use this app for whatever reason. And once you did that, it actually was submitted to a direct carrier billing service. So you entered a subscription, and monthly, on a monthly basis, were billed some money, like $15, together with your normal phone bill. So it took also time noticing it, because you could just think, okay, maybe I called a bit more people during that time. And if you look closely, you will see that they actually didn't really hide the fact that this was a subscription. So there was something in there claiming, okay, you're starting a subscription, it's renewing, it will there will be some conditions, you will be charged something. But the way it was presented, the entire app and what it does, and it was misleading. So if you didn't really pay attention, you didn't notice. And this is why this campaign was called Black Herring, so in reference to red herring, which is something that's misleading and distracting. And because of its malicious intent, this was the Black Herring campaign. Now, first lesson learned means always read the small print, which is kind of basic thing, but how often do we actually do it? Be honest. Now, this kind of form of strip-naked financially malware can have another form, something called usually fleeceware, which is, for example, this app. You can just normally download it. I mean, it's like a nice game, pop some bubbles, simulate slimy interactions, whatever. And it usually starts with a very short 3-day free trial period. And after that, it automatically becomes a subscription. And if you look at the prices they want here, this is a bit ridiculous for an app to pop some bubbles. So what would you normally do once you realize you have installed that app and it's now starting charging you money? You would go and uninstall it. But this doesn't put you on the safe side, because you actually have to go to the Play Store and actively cancel your subscription to make sure. So uninstalling alone is not enough whenever you're in this case. So next lesson learned here is then check the product costs, or check the costs and your subscriptions that are caused by your apps. Now, considering those examples, and especially the download number of over 100 million in this huge scamware campaign, the question is, how bad is it actually with mobile malware? Is it a huge problem? It's not that easy to answer this question, because we have to rely on, or we kind of have limited visibility. This is, for example, an analysis done by Kaspersky. So usually you get data from antivirus vendors who just can do analysis based on the data that they collect based on their products that are installed on devices. Meaning, not every device has, for example, a product or antivirus detection app or something installed by Kaspersky. So there's a huge unknown number of unknown cases, but still we can get a rough idea and see it's kind of a decreasing trend. Why is that? That's also hard to answer. I mean, could be that just the detection gets worse, so malware is better at hiding, but could of course also be that just malware, it gets harder for malware to actually infect phones, because with each Android update, new controls are put into place that make it harder to compromise the phone. Probably it's a bit of a mixture of both. So why are we just talking about Android? And no, it's not just because there's no book that's called Why Any Do iOS's Dream of Electric Sheep, but this is, again, maybe numbers taken with a bit grain of salt, because it's the Nokia threat intelligence report trying to show the distribution of malware between operating system or devices. And even if it's not 100% accurate, maybe, what you will see is that there is a bigger or a big part in Android, and we have no iOS at all. It's kind of hidden somewhere in the other part. That's not that there is no malware for iOS, but there are multiple reasons why Android devices are easier targets. The first thing, or the first thing, let me maybe ask a question here. Who of you has an Android phone and has Android 12 running on that phone? Okay. And who has a lower version than Android 12 running on those phones? Yeah, there are some, indeed. I mean, it's a security interested audience, so I expected that many of you are kind of up to date here, but it's, even if you want to be, it's not always your fault if you can't. Because if Apple pushes an update, they control the device, they control the operating system, it goes right through, every device gets the update. In Android, there are steps in between, there are multiple cooks at work. You have Google, who develops the operating system, you have the device manufacturers, and pushing those updates to the end user is actually the responsibility of the device manufacturers, and some just take it slowly, or don't even care and think it's of more profit to just bring out a new device with the newest Android instead of pushing updates to phones. And of course, each update fixes things. And because we have this huge fragmentation of different Android versions out there, it's always interesting for attackers. But there's another reason why it's easier with Android, which is this. There is a certain permission here, we will come back to this later again, that we can actually allow to install unknown apps, meaning you install apps from other sources than the Play Store. And as I said, we will come back to that in a second, see how this can become a problem. So another lesson learned for now is, okay, keep your Android phone up to date. So last two number slides, I promise. Why did I choose Hydra and Octo as examples, which we are going to look at now in a second? Again, taken with a grain of salt here, but if we look at what types of malwares are on the rise during the last quarters, we can see the Trojans quite constantly, it's growing, it's going up, while other types, it's a bit of an up and down. We had here a huge spike in so-called risk tools, which was mainly one type of malware, the SMS rack, that was responsible for those numbers. But Trojans are like usually also the ones that cause the most harm. So that's why we're going to look at those examples. Now, Hydra and Octo are both Trojans. And here we can see the share of what those two Trojans were in all those Trojans analyzed by the in the also again in the last quarter. And we can see Hydra is quite on top, or were the most examples. That's why I chose to include Hydra. Octo is a bit further down, but I decided to go for it because it's kind of a next generation, so it uses a lot of techniques malware has used before, but it always edits, it's like a small thing on top and takes it a little step further. And as you will see, those are usually tiny baby steps, some extra functionality, some extra things, but still, I mean, it's showing the progress that the malware makes. Now, let's look at Hydra. First, in case you get curious now by the talk and think about giving it like a swing yourself, just to be on the safe side, I of course have to warn you, don't play with malware on your private or your work phone. I think I shouldn't mention it, but just to be sure. Now, where would you actually get those malware samples? Just wait around till it comes to you is usually not the right way to go. But there are, of course, places online where you can find this, like Malware Bazaar, which has all types of malware, including Android, or the Kudos site, which is especially just for Android malware. So there you can find a lot of malware samples. And if you, for example, read a report or an article, a blog about some malware and techniques, it usually includes this hash of the malware samples that they used. And you can go to those pages and search for this specific sample as well. So you can kind of use it to follow along to maybe better understand the analysis they did and try it out yourself if you like. Now back to Hydra. If we look at those samples that we can find here on one of those pages, you can see it hides as a lot of different legitimate apps. Sometimes it's done quite well, like, I mean, this really looks like a legitimate Babak app. And sometimes it's maybe done not so well, so both from the icon and the name. So for those who haven't looked under the hood of Android yet, whenever you install an app, the file type you install is an APK, and those are the names of those APK bundles that you install when you install an app. So you might think, okay, if I just look at the names, maybe I might get suspicious sometimes already, which here, of course, you probably would. But for example, for the O2 and the Babak app, the legitimate ones are those two. And okay, for Babak, that looks quite serious, normal. But for O2, I mean, if you look at the name of the package, would you say this is the official O2 app? So looking from the outside, be it the icon, be it the name of the app itself, the name of the package, it won't tell you anything about what's inside. So this means we have to look inside. Now, what happens if we have installed one of those malicious apps? So for example here, the Hydra app disguising as eBay. Let's just dare it. Now, let's start the app. And what does it want from us? It tells us we have to go to the settings and activate accessibility. And we get or start receiving some push notifications. And once we click on go to settings, it directly leads us here to accessibility, and where we can see for now it's for eBay Mobile, it's off, and we get another push notifications. And you will get those push notifications in kind of a 5-second interval, and even if you close the app, they keep coming, so it's getting really annoying, really fast. It's kind of bullying you into, come on, do it, do it, do it. But now what happens if we kind of give in to the pressure and do it? So here we are again with the accessibility. And if we open it, we see there's not much text, any description, anything provided. If we activate it, we might get suspicious at this point because there's something about full control. But maybe we are one of those who are not really reading that well, and now it's kind of too late. Now we start losing control. So already starts here when I try to go back somewhere, nothing really happens. So this is the point where, let's say, the child fell into the well, or not sure if this works in English as well, but I guess you know where it's over. So what is this accessibility? Why does the app want this? This is a permission or a service that was actually, or is on phones and is intended actually for apps that are built for people with, for example, disabilities. So if you have, for example, blind people and they still want to use a smartphone, you have to give them an opportunity that something is telling them what's on the screen, that they can dictate text to the phone to fill in fields, and that a button is clicked if they tell them tell the phone this. And this is what the accessibility is for. So this is a really powerful service which is built in a good with a good cause, but of course is therefore valuable target for attackers, and that's why they want the accessibility. So, meaning, next lesson learned, always beware of the accessibility service. There's nearly never a good reason to give an app this permission. Now, let's have a look at Octo. And again, I'm just picking out one thing here, which is not exclusively used by Octo, but also by other malware types. But I will also show you what is the tiny step that the Octo malware added on top here. Now with Octo, once your phone got infected, something that could happen is, for example, that you're just using your normal banking app, and probably there's some kind of login screen, username, password. You enter your data, you click login, and you're screwed. And that's not because your banking app was somehow malicious. That's not Octo. That was your real banking app. But what Octo did was, it was actually on top of your real banking app. So it just put an overlay on top of it, exactly where the input was expected. And when you typed in your password, your username, whatever, you didn't type it into your actual app, but into the malware. And there's your data. Now, what Octo, for example, did, so the tiny step on top is usually this happens once you press a button, once you click or tap login, that this happens. But in this case, your data is already gone if you have typed in, for example, your name and then switch over to the password field. So while you change the focus, the data is already sent through the backend server, meaning even if you got suspicious at some point, entered your data and think about, okay, maybe not, let's not click login, it's too late already. So these are, as you can see, those are sometimes just tiny baby steps how malware progresses, but always getting a bit more dangerous in each step. Now, this drawing on top is, of course, again, something that you can't just do without asking. It's again a special permission called display over other apps. And if you look at the list here, you will see that there is actually quite a number of apps in here. So this is kind of like a fresh Android installation. And just by default, you already have quite a list in here. And this is because this is, again, a permission which is in a lot of cases quite useful. For example, with the YouTube app, once you started watching a YouTube video and maybe you want to start reading some article somewhere in the background or switch over to the other app and want to continue watching this video, it has to stay on top of the other app that you switch to and that you open. So this is why this permission is needed. Meaning I can't really give you the advice, don't allow this overlaying in general, or disallow this in general, but always be careful with app permissions. So use common sense and think about, does this app really need this permission? Why would make this overlay sense in an app with bursting bubbles, for example? So how can you now actually get infected? How does malware find the way on your phone? Usually it's not as easy as back then with the Nokia devices, just being in the elevator and then getting it via Bluetooth. But the most two common ways nowadays are, for example, this one, which I guess most of you have seen in some way. So like the mobile version of phishing, the smishing. So you get a SMS or sometimes also via social media, message claiming, for example, there's a package waiting for you and you kind of have to follow some steps to be able to retrieve it. It presents you a link which will then lead you to a page where you are supposed to download an app, which is of course a malicious app, and that's the way you can get infected. Now, for most people, this might still work in a lot of cases, but by now I think most have already heard to be careful just clicking on some or tapping on some links. So that's why there's a more evil or not so easily detectable way that malware can spread, and this is just going via the normal Google Play Store. And of course, all apps that are uploaded to the Play Store go through some scanning process and stuff, so you can't just upload anything malicious up there. but what we get there are so-called droppers. So the dropper looks like a normal legitimate app, for example, for currency conversion or document PDF viewer, something like that. And if we take a closer look at the permissions that those apps want, so again, a bit background under the hood here. So each Android app has a so-called manifest file in it, which is kind of a description on what the app what can do or request and what permissions it needs. And there's just one really interesting one in here. This is this request install packages. All the others are kind of, yeah, you can see them quite often, especially internet and access networks. Access network state are quite normal for apps. But what does this permission do? What happens if you have this app is you launch it and it says it has to install an update, and you have to kind of confirm this. So yeah, of course, update, always good. We want to update, so we keep progressing through the steps, and it will lead us in the end to, again, the install unknown apps setting, which we've seen before. So where we can give it allow this app to download apps and install apps, so install from other sources than the Play Store. And once we given this permission, kind of what does the app do? Of course, it downloads the actual malware in the background. So this is, again, not that easily detectable when you just download it from the Play Store, but you should get suspicious when you get to the point where it asks to install from unknown sources. So, quick recap, what were the lessons learned, the do's and don'ts? Most of them are quite common sense. So like, okay, update your phone, read the small prints, check for costs. So there's, I guess, not too much news in it. The others you might have, of course, also heard about, especially be careful with permissions. But as it always is with good advice, you're more likely, I hope, to follow it once you understand why this advice is given. And by now, I hope you can or you have understood that. So this is kind of the wake-up call from your nightmares, hopefully, or like the coffee that keeps you awake, so you actually don't even end up having a nightmare. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention. And yes, are there any questions I can answer? Yes.
Isn't it actually so that about 90% of all Android devices are insecure because they are not properly patched, because, for example, the manufacturers don't pay to Qualcomm for their closed source updates for the chipsets and so on?
It's true, yeah, that this update problem that we have with Android is a huge part of the problem, but I mean, there are multiple factors that have to come in place here. You have to have the right Android version targeted by the right malware, so this actually becomes a problem. But there are also, Google started an initiative to kind of improve this a bit, so it's something called the Project Treble, where they can actually really push certain updates that are the core functionality on the core directly to the phone. So that's something that doesn't have to go indirectly through the vendor. So far, I think it hasn't been such a big success yet, so we'll see whether this will work out. But in case you want to make sure to stay up to date, the only option is actually buying a Google Pixel phone. So then you're always on the safe side with the updates. But yeah, having an outdated Android version doesn't make you just a victim at the spot.
Okay, for follow-up questions, you are over there, you mentioned, somewhere on your place, on your stand? For follow-up questions,
yeah, for
you are over there?
follow-up question, yes, we are over there on your way to the cafeteria on the left. I will be there the entire evening. So.
Thank you for great advices. I know what I have to do the whole weekend, the whole family. Check their phones. So we have a break, I think, till 8:30. Yeah. I see we have a break till 8:30, then we are continuing here with the next block. Thank you for attending this great show and have fun outside.